Welcome to part three of our personal relationships series. In this video, we're going to be focusing on romantic relationships. So, when we talk about the types of romantic couples, we usually talk about them in terms of dating, cohabitating couples, and partnered couples. Now, when we talk about how couples come to be, we can go back to video one and look at how relationships develop. That's the same for both friendships and for romantic couples. And that brings us to dating. Dating encompasses that courtship period of time, and the time frame can vary. Some people date for a few weeks, and either the relationship ends or it moves to another level, and some people can date for years and years and years and years. We can date more than one person at a time. And a lot of this gets back to social exchange theory, where we're trying to figure out what are the benefits of dating any given person or persons. So, dating is a variable activity. Some people really only like to date one person at a time, and they're looking for that relationship to continue on those paths of development that we talked about in the first video. Other folks really are not that interested in moving beyond a very basic courtship phase. They're not looking into doing integrating and things like that. So it varies from couple to couple and person to person. After dating, we find people go into cohabitating, and this is when people decide to live in the same home. Sometimes this is a formal decision where they all move in together with an announcement, and sometimes people just start spending so much time together that they end up cohabitating by default. After cohabitation, we see partnered couples. So these are folks who are taking steps verbally or ceremonially or even legally to claim an intention to be in a long term committed relationship. So, however they do that, it's a public commitment to being partnered. And you occasionally see disagreement where one person believes that they're being partnered and another doesn't. And that usually means that they haven't really had any kind of public ceremony. One area that you see this is in terms of being common law married. When you look at most common law marriages, the law states that the couple has to both publicly portray themselves to other people as a married couple. So it's that verbal intention for both people to be in a long term committed relationship. Now, we talked about attachment styles last week and week before. Attachment styles really do influence our romantic relationships. We know that people who have that closer relationship with a parent and have a better attachment style are going to have longer, more fulfilling romantic relationships. So it's important for you to understand your attachment style and how that might be influencing romantic relationships in your own life. Another important hypothesis in terms of interpersonal communication and romance is the matching hypothesis. And this is very similar to friendships in that people with similar levels of attractiveness will pair together. So if you can imagine going into a bar and rating people on a scale of 1 to 10, which is tacky, but this is how the science works, and you imagine a person who you would determine is a 7, you would not see that person traditionally matching up romantically with somebody who is a 3. Usually we stay within one or two numbers of our own number. So if you're a 5, you would date a 3 up to a 7. If you're a 10, you're probably not going to be dating a 6. And that's the matching hypothesis. Now, when we talk about romance, people automatically go to passionate love. And passionate love is that early stage of a relationship where there's a lot of emotion, it's emotionally charged, and it can be incredibly exhilarating, but also incredibly painful. And that's one kind of love, but it is only one kind of love when we talk about romantic relationships. Companionate love is one that we see that eventually replaces most of that passionate love. And these are two people whose lives are interdependent and they share a stable and consistent love. They have time together, they have activities together, sometimes they have family in common, a lot of friends in common, and they're very happy together, but a lot of that passion is sort of ebbed away. So, what about sex then? If we're talking about passion, we're talking about romance, we can't leave sex out of the equation. Well, what's interesting is that sexual history and attitudes are a better predictor of a relationship forming than sexual attraction. So, just because you find somebody to be incredibly sexually attractive does not necessarily mean you're going to want to be in a relationship with them, because it's your values about sex that often influence whether or not the relationship will work. So, for example, if one member of the partnership is very sexually promiscuous and has a lot of partners, that usually predicts that they will not be partnered up with somebody who has a very limited sexual history and a belief that you have to be in a very close relationship in order to have a sexual relationship with someone. So that again gets back to our matching hypothesis. In this case, it's not matching the way we look, but it's a similarity in our approach to sex and sexuality. Sexual communication deals with the initiation or refusal of sexual activity and the communication about sexual likes and dislikes. And this also plays as important a role as sexuality and sexual activity in terms of the success of a relationship. We know that partners who communicate more often and more honestly about sex have stronger relationships. And it's important that we remember that in every relationship, consent is absolutely required for any and all sexual activity. That consent should be verbal, and learning to communicate openly about sex is incredibly important for all relationships. So now let's talk about sexual conflict. So sexual conflict is a disagreement over frequency or type of sexual activities. And a lot of people use this as a reason why a relationship is not successful because they don't necessarily see sex as being as needed in a relationship as their partner. Sexual conflict can also come from jealousy, and this is if one person believes their partner is focusing sexual thoughts or activities outside of the relationship without agreement and understanding. So, sexual conflict can be the downfall of a relationship. Now, as we talked about in our second video on friendships, one of the strongest predictors of a relationship continuing is a shared social network. So, as I mentioned when it came to friendships, that one of the struggles when you get into adulthood and you do partner up with someone is if your partner does not particularly like the people who are partners with your friends. So, let's say I have a friendship with another woman, she has a spouse, we all go out to dinner, and my husband doesn't particularly like her husband. It's going to make it more difficult for me to maintain that friendship. And so shared social networks are one of the strongest predictors of a continuing relationship. And network overlap is an extremely big predictor. So social connections that you hold in common. So let's say that my husband is already friends with my friend's husband, then we have a network overlap. And the more overlap we have, the higher the level of success we're going to have in terms of our relationship. This is a couple of reasons. One is that your friends or your overlapped network, whether it be friends, family, or coworkers, can create and sustain a positive relational culture. So they might be very happy that you're dating and they're going to be more supportive of the relationship and you're going to have more in common and more to talk about with each other. You're not going to be pulling each other away from friendships and relationships the way you would if you didn't have that network overlap. So it's important to think as you get into a romantic relationship, who are the people who my potential romantic partner is friends with? Are these people that I would want to interact with on a regular basis? Do we have any overlap in our friendships? And if the answer is no, then it is going to make it harder for your relationship to be successful. All right, so we've talked about how relationships develop. We've talked a bit about friendships. We talked a little bit about romantic relationships. Hopefully, this will give you some food for thought in terms of the relationships in your life, how they're developing, how they conclude, and how you can sustain them over time.